Okay, so this is the Gemara, Daf 21. Got to catch up here. And we're at the end of a Mishnah in 20. So the Mishnah starts out and says, one may not rent a house to a Gentile in Eretz Yisrael, and needless to say, one may not rent fields to them, as explained in the Gemara and in Syria. So now we're in 21. It says, one may rent houses, and in Syria, one may rent houses to Gentiles, but one may not rent fields. And outside of Eretz Yisrael, one may sell houses and rent fields to Gentiles. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yoshi says, in Eretz Yisrael, one may rent houses to Gentiles, but one may not rent fields. And in Syria, one may sell houses to them and rent fields. And outside of Eretz Yisrael, one may sell both these, houses and those fields. Even in a place with regard to which the sages said that it is permitted for a Jew to rent a house to a Gentile, they did not say that one may rent it for use as a residence, because the Gentile will bring objects of idol worship into it, as it is stated, quote, you shall not bring an abomination into your house, Deuteronomy 7:26. And this is still considered the house of a Jew. And for the same reason, in every place one may not rent a bathhouse to a Gentile, since it is called by the name of the owner, and onlookers will think that the Jew is operating it on Shabbat. So back to the Gemara. The Gemara says, what is the meaning of the Mishnah? The Mishnah's statement, needless to say, one may not allow Gentiles to rent fields. Why is the halacha with regard to fields more obvious than the halacha of houses? If we say that it is because allowing a Gentile to rent a field entails two problems, one of which is aiding Gentiles in encamping in land, and the other one is that doing so releases the land from the mitzvah of separating tithe. This cannot be correct. The Gemara explains why that cannot be the reason. If that is so, the same can be said about the prohibition against renting houses, as it also involves two problems. One is aiding Gentiles in encamping in the land, and the other one is that it releases the house from the mitzvah of mezuzah. So Rav Misharshia says in response, affixing a mezuzah is the obligation of the resident, rather than an obligation that applies to the house. Therefore, if no Jew lives in a house, it is not subject to the mitzvah of mezuzah. This means that by renting a house to a Gentile, one is not removing the right to perform the mitzvah from the house. So the Mishnah teaches, in Syria, one may rent houses but not fields to Gentiles. The Gemara asks, what is different about selling houses that it is not permitted to sell houses in Syria? The Gemara answers, it is prohibited due to a concern that this will ultimately result in the selling of houses in Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara challenges, if that is so, let us also issue a decree prohibiting renting houses to Gentiles in Syria, lest it lead to renting to Gentiles in Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara explains, the prohibition against renting houses to Gentiles in Eretz Yisrael is itself a rabbinic decree, lest one come to sell the houses, and shall we arise and issue one decree to prevent the violation of another? The Gemara challenges, but the prohibition against renting a field that is in Syria is also a decree whose purpose is to prevent the violation of another decree, as the prohibition against allowing a Gentile to rent one's field in Eretz Yisrael is a rabbinic decree, and yet we still issue the decree. The Gemara explains, according to Rabbi Meir, there with regard to selling houses and fields in Syria to Gentiles, the prohibition is not merely a decree intended to prevent the violation of the decree with regard to Eretz Yisrael. Rather, Rabbi Meir holds that the conquest of an individual is called a conquest. Once Syria was conquered by King David, who was considered an individual in this regard, the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael applied to it. Therefore, concerning a field which has two problems, as one releases the land from the mitzvah of separating tithes and aids Gentiles in acquiring land in Eretz Yisrael, the sages issued a decree as a preventative measure prohibiting the renting of fields just as in Eretz Yisrael, but according to houses which do not have two problems, the sages did not issue such a decree. And the Mishnah teaches the Mishnah teaches that according to Rabbi Meir, outside of Eretz Yisrael, one may sell houses and rent fields, but one may not sell fields to Gentiles. The Gemara explains, concerning a field which has two problems when it is in Eretz Yisrael, the sages issued a decree preventing the sale even outside of Eretz Yisrael. Concerning houses we do not have two problems, the sages did not issue a decree prohibiting their sale. The Mishnah further teaches that Rabbi Yoshi says in Eretz Yisrael one may rent houses but not fields to Gentiles. The Gemara explains, what is the reason that one may rent houses but not fields? Concerning fields, which have two problems, the sages issued a decree as a preventative measure prohibiting the renting of fields in Eretz Yisrael, but concerning houses, which do not have two problems, the sages did not issue a decree prohibiting renting houses to Gentiles. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Yoshi rules, and in Syria, one may sell houses and rent fields to Gentiles, but one may not sell fields. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that one may sell houses but not fields? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Yoshi holds that the conquest of an individual is not called a conquest. Therefore, there is no prohibition by Torah law against selling houses in Eretz Yisrael. And concerning a field, which has two problems, the sages issued a decree as a preventative measure prohibiting the sale of fields in Syria. Concerning houses which do not have two problems, the sages did not issue a decree prohibiting their sale. The Mishnah continues. Outside of Eretz Yisrael, one may sell houses and fields. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? The Gemara answers, since this land is at a distance from Eretz Yisrael, the sages do not issue a decree, unlike Syria, which is near Eretz Yisrael. In conclusion, Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yoshi that it is permitted to sell houses outside of Eretz Yisrael to Gentiles. Rabbi Yosef says, and this is a halacha provided that one does not make it into a Gentile settlement. How many people constitute a settlement? The sages taught there is no settlement that consists of fewer than 3 people. The Gemara challenges. But let us be concerned that perhaps this Jew will go and sell to one Gentile, and the other owners of the adjacent houses will go and sell to 2 other Gentiles, resulting in a Gentile settlement. Abaye said we are commanded about placing a stumbling block before the blind, Leviticus 19:14. But we are not commanded about placing a stumbling block before someone who may place it before the blind. In other words, this prohibition applies only when one causes another to sin by his direct action, not in a situation such as this, where the prohibition is 2 stages removed from the Jew's action. The Mishnah teaches that even in a place with regard to which sages said that it is permitted for a Jew to rent a house to a Gentile, they did not say that one may rent it for use as a residence. The Gemara points out by inference, this means that there is a place where one may not rent any house to a Gentile. And this unattributed opinion in the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. As if you say that this ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yoshi, that cannot be, since he holds that in every place one may rent a house to a Gentile, including Eretz Yisrael. The Mishnah teaches, and in every place one may not rent a bathhouse to a Gentile as it is called by the name of the owner. The Gemara notes that it is taught in Braita that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says a person may not rent his bathhouse to a Gentile because it is called by the name of the owner. And this Gentile uses it performing prohibited labor on Shabbatot and on festivals. Yomi Tovim. So the Gemara asks, is it prohibited to rent one's bathhouse to a Gentile, but with regard to a Samaritan, what is the halacha? It can be inferred from the lack of mention of a Samaritan that it is permitted. The Gemara asks, why not say that a Samaritan will perform work in the bathhouse during the intermediate days of a festival? The Gemara answers, during the intermediate days of a festival, we too perform work in heat bathhouses, because you're allowed to perform work. The Gemara further infers, it is prohibited to rent one's bathhouse to a Gentile, but with regard to renting one's field to a Gentile, what is the halacha? Ultimately, the problem, though, that comes down with a Samaritan is that they don't always celebrate their holidays. It's not going to always fall on the same day that the Jews are celebrating. So they might see that it's permissible to perform labor on an intermediate day of a festival. So that's a potential thought on that. Okay, so the Gemara further infers, it is prohibited to rent one's bathhouse to a Gentile, but with regard to renting one's field to a Gentile, what is the halacha? Evidently, it is permitted. What is the reason for this? People know that a Gentile sharecropper works for his tenancy, not for the Jewish owner. The Gemara asks, but if so, in the case of a bathhouse as well, why not say that the Gentile sharecropper works for his tenancy, and therefore Jews should be permitted to rent them to Gentiles? The Gemara answers, people do not usually make this type of arrangement whereby a second party works as a sharecropper of a bathhouse. Consequently, it would be assumed that the Gentile is a hired worker who is working for the Jew. So the Gemara cites a similar discussion. It is taught in Braita that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says a person may not rent his field to a Samaritan since it is called by the name of the owner, and the Samaritan will perform work in it during the intermediate days of a festival. The Gemara infers, it is prohibited to rent one's field to a Samaritan, but with regard to a Gentile, what is the halacha? Evidently, it is permitted, as we say that the Gentile sharecropper works for his tenancy and not for the Jewish owner. The Gemara asks, if that is so, in the case of a Samaritan as well, why not say that the sharecropper works for his tenancy? And that is the end of Daf 21. Thanks for watching.